And hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Cable. Chapters is the television show that profiles local authors, editors, and publishers in our community. I'm Eliot Parker, and it's great to have you with us. We are delighted to have author Eric Douglas with us here today to talk about his plethora of very interesting fiction and nonfiction projects. And Eric is an adventurer, and life has been an adventure for him, both above the water and below the water, and wherever in the world he ends up. Eric received a degree in journalism from Marshall University. He worked in local newspapers where he honed his skills as a storyteller, and following a stint as a freelance journalist in the former Soviet Union, Eric became a dive instructor, and not too much later after that, he became a diving medical technician. He moved from California to North Carolina, and he became the director of training and education department at Divers Alert Network. And one of the things that we'll talk about in his books that features quite prominently in his stories is that the ocean and diving have all factored into all of his fiction works since then. He has authored 5 dive adventure novels in the Mike Scott Adventure series called Cayman Cowboys, Flooding Hollywood, Guardian's Keep, Wreck of the Huron, and his latest, Heart of the Maya. He's also written a series of dive adventure short stories set on the fictional Withrow Key in the Florida Keys, and he's also authored 2 children's books, Sea Turtle Rescue and Swimming with the Sharks. And he's also co-authored the scuba diving reference book, Scuba Diving Safety. And since 2009, he has written the Lessons for Life column for Scuba Diving Magazine. So we are pleased to have a very talented and experienced writer and scuba diver and jack of all trades.
Jack of all trades is fair enough.
Good to see you, Eric. Thanks for coming on.
I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. So let's get right into this. I'm curious as to how journalism and getting that degree in journalism, working in newspapers, and that stint you had in the former Soviet Union. How did all of that come about, and how did that help you as a writer?
You know, it's amazing how I can now look back on it 20, 25 years later and see how it all really did add up and go together. I'm still convinced to this day, if I hadn't taken the risk when I was given the opportunity to go to Russia for the first time back in '93, that if I hadn't done that, 5 years later, I was offered a job in the diving industry because of that. My boss there said, you really don't have the credentials we're looking for, but we're really impressed with what you did here back when you went to Russia in '93. So, it's amazing how things that don't even seem to go together open doors, and that's my advice actually to anybody is always, even if it doesn't seem to make sense at the time or doesn't seem to be directly on your path and you're interested in it, go after it anyway. It's amazing how this stuff comes back around. But I proud Marshall graduate from the journalism school, worked in newspapers for a while, and it was, I think the greatest part about that for me was getting out and just talking to people. I've sat in so many people's living rooms and talked about their problems or what they're facing or dealing with, and I learned to understand people a whole lot better just being a journalist and getting to listen to people. I did some hard news, but I really loved the feature pieces and where you actually get to learn about people and understand what's going on. So that's the basis for everything I do at this point.
So you became interested in becoming a dive instructor. Where did that interest come from? When was the first time you went under the water, and how did you get hooked on this whole thing about diving?
The funny thing about that is it actually still applies to journalism. I graduated from Marshall in '89, and I'm looking at my resume, and there's just about nothing on it. A few things, but nothing all that impressive. But I'm thinking to myself, as every 24-year-old journalism graduate wants to do, I want to work for National Geographic. That's my goal. And I thought to myself, what could I do to beef up my resume and make me more appealing to National Geographic? And I thought, well, I could learn to fly, or I could learn to scuba dive. And I priced out both of them. And flying was much more expensive than learning to dive. And so literally that's how it all started. And it's amazing how that has taken off, and I've gotten to travel all over the world and go places. But it was pretty much a calculated decision to learn to scuba dive because I thought that would make me more appealing to National Geographic. Haven't gone to work for National Geographic yet, but there's still time. I haven't given up hope yet.
Very good. Excellent. And one more question about diving, then we'll get into some of your writing. Mm-hmm. You became a diving medical technician. Mm-hmm. What is that?
A DMT is effectively an EMT. with about 40 more hours of training on top of that, specific to dealing with diving emergencies, hyperbaric chambers, treating divers, and dealing with dive emergencies. The bends is the primary thing. And that's a great example of one of those things that had, it didn't make any sense for me to do that at the time. It wasn't directly on my career path at the time, but I thought, that's kind of cool. I'd like to pursue that. And by becoming a DMT and working, this was in California at the time, working with the Catalina Hyperbaric Chamber crew and treating divers, getting hands-on treatment with divers, I learned about diving accidents, but it also made me attractive to the company in North Carolina. So they ended up hiring me because of that. And if I hadn't gone to North Carolina, I wouldn't have had the chance to travel and go to all these islands and countries and places that I got to visit. So I see a direct path, even though it's a wavy path. I see a direct path for so many different things I've gotten to do over the years, just by being curious and saying, that sounds fun. Let's pursue that.
Which is a great attitude to have, by the way.
Thank you.
That peak of curiosity. You've written a number of books, fiction, nonfiction, children's books. I wanted to ask you, which book was your first book in this collection? And then tell us a little bit about what it was about and where the idea for that story came from.
The first fiction I wrote, period. I went about this the entirely wrong way. My first piece of fiction was a novel. Instead of doing short stories, and I know I just went straight for the long haul and wrote a book. But the first one was Cayman Cowboys. That was in 2000. It was published in 2005. And it's set on Grand Cayman, and here's that connection again. I was on Grand Cayman doing some training with my full-time position, doing some safety training for some of the local dive instructors down there. And I was actually, there's a place on the eastern end of the island where the waves crash through the coral, and it blows straight up in there. They call it the blowholes. And as I'm walking across this, and this is coral that's been exposed to the sun and wind and rain, so it's really jagged. It's like walking on lava. And I'm thinking to myself, what would I'm praying I don't fall and bleed to death. And that literally, I went, wow, what would take somebody trying to imagine somebody being so scared that they ran across it. Mm-hmm. And that ended up being that instant ended up being the first scene in Cayman Cowboys. I wrote that scene, wrote some more after it, then I realized, I can't start there, so I actually had to go back and write about a third of the book before that scene. But that was the seed or the original scene of Cayman Cowboys. The story ends up being about a greedy developer is basically shoving people out of the way and tearing up the coral reef with the idea of putting in a new cruise ship dock. But he's also, at the same time, using that as an excuse to look for some buried treasure that's just off the island as well. So there's all kinds of intrigue and running around. And with most of these novels, there's several diving scenes. I take my characters underwater, but I've been told by a lot of people that even if you don't dive, I explained it in such a way that they feel like they're right there. They don't. Well, this doesn't make any sense to me. They get it, and I've been told by several people that they have trouble breathing because they get so nervous when the guys are in danger, and so I guess I get it okay.
You do. I was going to comment that is one of the great strengths. I know nothing about diving other than what I've seen on TV and talking with you and reading your books, but I do. I feel like in all of your books, and we're going to talk about two of them in more detail here in just a moment. I feel like I'm right there, and I feel like every breath that your character's taking, I'm taking that breath, and there were moments in reading your books where I started to feel sweat on my brow because I started to get a little nervous. I was so into it. But I think that,
well, thank you.
That's such a strength. No, absolutely. I think that's a strength of your storytelling is that you can take me right there no matter where I am or what's going on, and I'm right there with those characters.
And the challenge for writing an underwater scene is there's no dialogue. Now you can say what they're thinking about, mm-hmm. and then you have to get into hand signals and that sort of thing for communication. But other than that, it's purely descriptive and what the person's feeling, what they're experiencing. So you can't. There's no dialogue. There's no exchange between the characters underwater. other than the occasional look or gesture or that sort of thing. Some of those gestures get a little rude too underwater when things get a little crazy.
Yes, they do. That's a little bonus about your stories. There are some rude gestures, very apropos for the situation, but yes, they could be a little bit rude. Let me ask you about one book that I really enjoyed, Heart of the Maya, a Mike Scott adventure. And this is a thriller series that actually starts in Huntington. Tell us a little bit about what that book is about and your thoughts on Mike Scott as a character, because I found him to be very, very interesting, and I wanted to follow him and root for him in that book. But tell us a little bit about him and how the book starts from Huntington and gets to the Cayman Islands.
Well, I have to tell you the backstory on who Mike Scott was. When I was at Marshall, one of my best friends actually from high school and then at college was Michael Scott Burnsworth. And Mike ended up dying from cancer in '89, in my senior year. And I told myself, you're 23 years old and you've just lost your best friend to cancer, and it's a struggle. It was difficult. And I told myself I was going to find a way to remember Mike. Then Mike Burnsworth, and especially that Burnsworth last name is just such a long name, but I thought I can call the character Mike Scott. And for me, that's how I'm going to remember Mike for the rest of my life. Everybody says that the character is me, or resembles me, and there's probably a little bit, but the description, the physical description of him is Mike, is my friend Mike who passed away 20 years ago. So that's who Mike is. But Mike's developed. I tried to think about, and here's back to the journalism background. I tried to think about a character who had an excuse to travel and to go these places and to be involved with a lot of different things. And we've all read so many stories with the secret detective or the spy novels or whatever. And it just gets a little tiring after a while. So there's some people who do amazing jobs with it, but sometimes it's like, really, one more super secret agent spy. Okay, I've done that. And I thought, an international journalist. He's a photojournalist. And actually, the Cayman Cowboy story, he actually starts out, the story starts with Mike Scott in the Middle East. And he actually loses a reporter he's working with in a story that goes bad and it gets blown up. And so he's heading to Grand Cayman to unwind and relax. And then he's a little wounded at first. And then as the story progresses, he kind of comes at it and realizes his strength is actually being involved with this kind of stuff and unraveling these sorts of things. But that's who Mike Scott is. I've had a lot of fun with that character. Mike Scott's a friend, even in real life, but in my fictional life too. Mike Scott's a good friend of mine. Heart of the Maya, we go to Mexico.
Sure.
We start here. I'm sorry, we actually never got to the plot behind Heart of the Maya. The story makes a connection to the Adena Indians who lived throughout this whole river valley and through this whole region 2,000 odd years ago. And there are burial mounds all up and down the valley. So basically the story starts out with an archaeological dig here in Huntington underneath an Adena Indian burial mound. And through some connections and through the joy of writing fiction, I get to make a connection between the Adena Indians and the Maya Indians in Mexico. So after we've unraveled the murder of a Marshall student from 25 years before, Mike decides to go figure out why this all happened, and that's why we take off to Mexico. So for the diving angle on that, we actually end up diving. I have my characters diving in a flooded cave underneath the Adena Indian burial mound. And then when they go down to Mexico, then the cenotes, which are freshwater springs, into Mexico. So we're diving all over the place.
Yeah, and great description and pacing and just feeling in those scenes of going underwater. It's great. Mike Scott's a great character. Another character that I really liked that popped up in another novel you wrote, Rivertown, Hayden Lowe. Mm-hmm. And the impetus for this story is he may or may not have killed a man out west. And what I liked about this book is not only that premise, and not only is Hayden Lowe an interesting character, but then he comes across Lillian Conley. Mm-hmm. He comes across a private journal, which has got all kinds of clues in it. And then there's a gentleman by the name of Captain J.D. Lawson, mm-hmm. who's also involved in the story. A lot of great characters with great dynamics and the way they interact with each other. Tell us a little bit about Rivertown and these characters you created and what you were going for in trying to create all these different characters.
In fairness, I didn't create all the characters in Rivertown. Rivertown is a collaboration. There's actually 6 different writers involved with Rivertown.
Okay.
Rivertown, back when I was a teenager, one of my favorite books was Thieves' World, and Robert Lynn Ashburn was the editor on that project. But it was what they did was he and a group of writer friends all created characters and threw them in a pot, basically. And the agreement was you can use any other character in your story. You just can't change them significantly. You can't marry them off. You can't maim them. You can't kill them. But so let's write a series of short stories. Rivertown was the same premise. I asked some writer friends. I said, "Give me a character." The setting is 1890 in Charleston. It's a river town. It's before the trains had come through. It's all about the sternwheelers and the river boats and all that sort of thing. And I said, "Give me a character you would find in 1890 Charleston." And then, so we all got those first, and then said, "All right, now write your story." And I had actually written my story. I ended up writing the bookends, and then I wrote the middle story. I wrote the Racing Miss Jane Marie story in the middle of that. But what ended up happening by the time this project was done, instead of a half dozen independent short stories, which is sort of what I expected to happen, it ends up having, each story has its own arc. But then there's an arc that follows throughout the whole book. I don't know how we got that to happen. I mean, that was one of those lucky events that I was like, wow, this has actually turned out better than I expected. It was very cool. I'm really proud of Rivertown.
I know that Rivertown, too, the first time I read it through, I missed the fact that these were short stories written by different authors. I think that's because I enjoyed the characters so well, and I saw that overarching theme that you were talking about. Then I went back and thought, wait a minute, these are different stories kind of collaborated together. But there's some great characters in Rivertown.
Absolutely. And I wish I could take credit for creating Hayden Lowe. He is probably the best character in the book as far as I'm concerned, but I'm not. I can't take credit for that one. But Catherine Herndon was actually the writer who wrote that character, which was kind of interesting too. You know, he's a 20-year-old male kind of wild child cowboy, and it's a adult woman, shall we say, writing that character. So, but she does a fantastic job with it.
He's great. He's a great character. Eric, let me ask you too. You've been able to make the transition also to writing a couple of children's books, Sea Turtle Rescue and Swimming with the Sharks. We've interviewed a lot of children's writers on this program, and one of the interesting things they all say is the challenge of writing a children's book. People think, well, it's not writing 80,000 words like fiction, or it's not putting together 12 stories, in a short story collection, or it's not writing nonfiction. It's just 60 pages, and you only have to have maybe 20 words on each page or something like that. But they all talk about the challenge in writing children's books. What did you find challenging, and was it hard to make the transition from writing fiction and novels to writing those children's books?
It was different. It was a different challenge. I think they're all challenging in their own ways. But for me, what ended up being my own daughters, these are really first chapter books. So they're, first through third grade is the target. They're not illustrated chapter books. They're those first readers or first chapter readers. And my own daughters, I have two daughters, and they were about that age at the same time. And we read so many of the Magic Treehouse books, which are great stories. But we read so many of them. Like, girls, how about we write one for ourselves? And I sitting on the driveway with them one day. We're playing with chalk or something. And I said, "So, girls, if we wrote a story together, what would we write about?" And of course, they're giving me unicorns, and they're okay, let's bring it down a little, focus a little better. But we ended up, the stories are about two little girls, two young girls living on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, because I was living in North Carolina at the time, and learning about the sea. And especially, it's interesting, they're teenagers now, but there's still a connection between us and sea turtles, because that was the first book, and it meant a lot to them. So it was something fun to do with the girls. There's actually 4 stories. There's 2 out. There's two more that I actually licensed off to the Newspapers and Education program, and I actually get the license back from those this summer. So I'm actually planning to re-release probably both those books and put all 4 stories into one big chapter book with 4 kids' stories in it this summer.
And for our audience who may not be familiar, what is the Newspapers and Education program?
Newspapers and Education is just a way that the newspaper system or newspaper associations try to get people interested in reading newspapers. So they provide newspapers, they put stories in the newspapers that are kid friendly, and they provide those newspapers to the classrooms so they can get kids interested in identifying with reading cool stuff in the newspaper, hoping to get people reading newspapers as they become adults on their own. And so that's what NIEs, that's what Newspapers in Education is. It's funny that especially I first did Cayman Cowboys. I'm sorry, not Cayman Cowboys. Sea Turtle Rescue. They first licensed that story, and then after that one was done, they asked for 2 others. And the Sea Turtle Rescue story got published all over the country in newspapers, and including a newspaper in Bermuda, which I found really interesting. That a newspaper in Bermuda is publishing a story about kids in North Carolina learning about sea turtles, but it was fun anyway. But yeah, it was something for me to do. It was certainly a challenge to keep the language, certainly not dumbing it down. I don't believe in talking to kids, but using language that they would understand and emotions and feelings that they would understand. So it was certainly a challenge, but it was fun too. But again, I was talking to my kids every day, so I got to. I thought, okay, here's how I talk to them, okay, and then as soon as I put them to bed, I write, grab the laptop and start hacking away. But,
yeah, that's great. And that was one of my questions was, when do you write? Where do you write? What is your method for writing?
When I was first starting out, the first couple novels and the kids' books and that, I was working full time, so I was and had 2 young children at home, and so I would write from 9 till 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, just about every night. But I never wrote when they were up because too many distractions. I think
Sure.
you had. But also, I wanted to spend time with my kids. Now I have the good fortune of this is my full-time job. I do some consulting work and that kind of thing, and writing for other people. But I'm a full-time writer. So I get up every morning. My wife gets up at 7 o'clock. So do I. Make a cup of coffee and go my long commute down to the basement, down to my office. And sometimes I still have on my house shoes and trudge down to the computer and fire it up and start. Yeah, it's the first couple hours of the morning for me is usually dealing with stuff. It's just the administrative things or emails or whatever. Probably 10:30, 11 o'clock. I try to write something creative, moving my needle forward, whether it's one of the novels or whatever. Today went almost exactly that way. I worked on a couple things, the new cover for the new book, as a matter of fact, and some promotional stuff. And then about 11 o'clock, I actually grabbed my laptop and went out on the patio and fired it up and cranked out about 1,000 words for a novella I'm working on that'll come out sometime later this summer as well. And it was another of the Withrow Key stories, that collection of short stories. And so, yeah, I'm always working on something, but that's kind of how my day goes anymore. Is midday usually is probably my strong period to write, and I'll get a couple 3 hours of solid writing in just about every day.
Excellent, very good. You've also written some nonfiction books, Keeping On, a breast cancer story, West Virginia Voices of War, Common Valor for Cheap Lobster, a great title which I love, Russia Coming of Age, and Scuba Diving Safety. Seems like a lot of these nonfiction works come from experience and from your interests. Is that where you tend to go when you think about taking on a nonfiction project or writing a book?
It does. And it actually kind of goes back to coming full circle to a degree. It's journalistic in nature. The West Virginia Voices of War project was a documentary project. When I moved back to West Virginia, I had been gone for about 15 years. And so when I moved back to West Virginia, I wanted to find a way to get kind of involved with the community again. And I learned that at the time, in the Library of Congress has what they call the Veterans History Project. At the time, there were only 20 oral histories from West Virginia war veterans in this collection. Okay, that's inexcusable as far as I was concerned. So I literally started out without any real plan in mind, just to start collecting these oral histories and see what I could do with it. And I ended up, by the time it was all said and done, collected 46 oral histories from West Virginia war veterans. But as I did that, I could see a theme between and it wasn't everybody from Vietnam talking about something or everybody from Afghanistan talking about something. It was everybody from World War II through Afghanistan talking about, missing people at home and why they were there, or losing a buddy, or there were these consistent themes. That ended up becoming a documentary, a multimedia documentary, and then it became a book as well. So the book is actually 4 to 5 pages of each veteran that I spoke to, kind of their story, but also the transcript of the documentary that I put together. So a lot of my nonfiction pieces, that scuba diving safety goes back to the diving stuff and the diving medicine stuff, but a lot of the things are journalistic or documentary in nature. That I actually, when I was in North Carolina, completed the certificate program at the Center for Documentary Studies, which is part of Duke University. And that's where For Cheap Lobster came from. That was actually kind of the combination of the first nonfiction documentary thing and the scuba diving. That was the Lobster Divers of Honduras. And here's the other full circle piece. That story, the documentary that I put together in a magazine article I put together, ended up National Geographic.com ended up doing a story about the same topic, interviewing me and using a few of my pictures. So I haven't worked for the magazine yet, but we're getting closer. And then the story ended up, the New York Times ended up doing a story using some of my stuff, and then NBC called me. And ended up taking me, I went down as kind of their resident expert. They used my stuff as background material, and NBC aired about a 12-minute story, which in TV journalism is decades.
Oh, forever. Yeah, it is. It's forever.
They did about a 12-minute piece in Honduras that I was interviewed on screen for that too. So it was a nice combination of the documentary work and the diving work at the same time.
In our remaining moments, Eric, I wanted to ask you, as we finish up, about your radio interview program that you host. It's called Writer's Block on Voices of Appalachia and New Appalachian Radio. And in this, you interview Appalachian authors about home and how they're influenced by the mountains that they call home. When did this start? What was the impetus for this? And how long do you see this going?
There might be another writer here that I might have already interviewed for the show, right?
Yeah, yes, that's right. Present company included in this case.
Voices of Appalachia, first off, is a really interesting project. Eric Meadows created Voices of Appalachia, and his entire theme is a streaming radio station, but the music is exclusively by Appalachian musicians. Now, it doesn't mean it's all banjo music. There's plenty of that too, but it's music from every genre, but it has to be created by people from Appalachia. It's a way to focus on the voices of Appalachia. And so when he asked me to help him out with it, and I've been assisting him for about 6 months now, but we were talking about different things we could do, and he said, you might do a writer's block, for example. And I went, well, there's the name of the show right there. And but the idea is that we have writers from Appalachia, from this region, who talk about everything. One of my favorite comments was Marie Manella, the local author Marie Manella, lovely lady. But she was talking about what she refers to as urban Appalachia. We all have this, even Appalachian authors, we think about, well, it's the banjo music and it's the stories of the backcountry folk and that. There's so many people in Appalachia writing about so many different things that have there's some really cool stuff being produced here. So that was the whole idea behind the radio show, was I wanted to be able to focus on people, on these amazing talents who were talking about our history, our background, but in a different way, without the stereotypes, I guess. So I've interviewed people who do kind of the backcountry country, but I've also talked to people like you, like Marie, like Carter Taylor Seton, a number of different authors who've done some tremendous work. So it's been a lot of fun, actually. And the great thing for me, and I say this in almost every episode that I do of the show, is I'm having more fun just meeting the other writers. Yeah. It's been a blast for me. I'm sure you have the same experience. Absolutely. And I've made some good friends out of it. So it's cool.
That's great. And Eric, if anyone wants to get in contact with you about your books or to learn more about what you're up to, or if they want to get in tune or plugged into the Voices of Appalachia Writer's Block program, how can they get in contact with you? How can they follow your show?
The easiest thing to do is booksbyeric.com. One of my standard jokes is when I actually I've had that website for 10 years. I got the website right before Cayman Cowboys came out. But the website is bookbyeric.com. I was very optimistic at the time that there would be more than a book. so I went for books by, it could have been book by Eric, but anyway. So everything's on there. They're links, all the books are available through Amazon, but they're on Kindle and in print. But if you're, everything's available through the website. That's the easiest place to find it. And then there's a link to the radio show on the website as well. Or you can go straight to voicesofappalachia.com. And the show airs Monday nights at 7 o'clock, but then all the shows are archived as well, so you can go back and listen to them as podcasts. So
that's great. And that's a great service you're doing for the region and for the authors who write about this region so well.
It's been a blast so far.
Eric, it's been a pleasure having you on Chapters here today. Author of Rivertown novel, which is one of my favorites, Heart of the Maya, which is another one of my favorites, but a variety of different books, fiction, nonfiction, children's books, and also the host of the Writer's Block program. We appreciate you so much for coming on Chapters. We wish you all the best of luck, and as you keep writing and keep doing things, we'll have you back on to talk to you again soon.
That sounds great. I'd love to.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
All righty.
And finally, we want to take a moment to say thanks to Charlotte McCoy and her staff at Empire Books and News for providing our studio taping space today, and also for providing all kinds of assistance behind the scenes each week here on Chapters. We remind you to stop by Empire Books and News to satisfy all your reading needs and check out their magazine collection. It's the largest magazine collection in the tri-state. So whatever you like to read, they've got it for you right here at Empire Books and News, and we appreciate their sponsorship and support so much each and every week here on Chapters. And if you've got a question, comment, or story suggestion about this Chapters program or any Chapters program that you've seen on Armstrong Cable, we want to hear from you. You can send us an email to the address that pops up right here at the bottom of the screen, lp4@zoominternet.net. That's how you can reach us right here on the show, and we appreciate all the comments and feedback that we have received. And if you want to go back and watch an older episode of Chapters, we've made that available for you as well through the Armstrong One Wire page on YouTube. All you need to do is go to www.youtube.com/Armstrong One Wire, all one word. From there, locate the Chapters tab, and you can see all of our previous interviews with authors, editors, and publishers from throughout West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky, right there on Chapters, at the Chapters link through the Armstrong One Wire page on YouTube. So we encourage you to do that, and we do appreciate those folks who've gone back and watched old episodes and left us some comments on what they've seen. It's much appreciated, and we appreciate your comments, feedback, and support as well. And that's going to do it for us this time on Chapters. Please come again next time, and in the meantime, stay tuned to this station for news and views that impact you and your community.